from the devolved Scottish Parliament, which would have simplified the process by which transgender men and women change their legally recognised gender. Under UK law, transgender people must have lived for 2 years as their acquired sex and must have an official medical diagnosis for gender dysphoria. The Scottish Parliament had voted to remove the need for medical diagnosis and instead rely on the principle of transgender people self-identifying as a particular sex. The reforms would also have cut the 2-year wait to 3 months, with 16 and 17-year-olds allowed to change their legally registered gender after 6 months. Aside from the constitutional dispute, the proposals themselves have been the subject of quite a lot of controversy. We've been speaking to people on both sides of the argument. First, let's hear the thoughts of Scottish transgender campaigner Herbert, who describes how she thinks the ability to self-identify would affect the lives of trans people in Scotland.
The current process to change your gender identity in legal terms involves collating 2 years' worth of documentation, every bank letter, every bill, every pay slip. If you've had any medical intervention, not that you need medical intervention, getting all that information from your general practitioner, to have a panel of people who've never met you, who have no contact with you, assess if you're the gender that you are. This is a very laborious process. It's a process that a lot of trans people don't partake in because we can change pretty much all of our documentation, our passports, our driving licenses, our medical records. All of that information can be changed very simply. All a gender recognition certificate does is allow us to change our birth certificate, which then allows marriage certificates or death certificates to be updated correctly.
What difference would this law have made to your life as a transgender person had you been younger when it had been brought through?
I think the change is part of a bigger change in society. One of the hidden benefits in this whole debate is that for the first time, we've heard trans voices. When I was growing up, transgender people didn't exist. Nowadays, thanks partly to an increased in visibility, we exist and people can see us.
Now, even those who are very sympathetic to trans rights, I would suppose that although none of this has anything to do with medical intervention, I gather that, the main alarm bell that rings would be over age, 16. Are you old enough at 16 to decide what sex you are?
Most people have an idea of their gender identity from when they're very young, from when they're 3 or 4 years old. So 16 is quite a long time to have had that.
But on the issue of being sure of your gender identity from a very young age, I take your point that some people from birth feel that they identify as a different gender. Other people's feelings are more fluid, aren't they? There are cases of people who identify as female at 16 and at 26 want to be male again.
Yes, there are. There's two issues here, I think. There are people who are uncertain, and those people under the proposed system can change back, and there's no penalty and it's not a criminal matter for people to revert back to their original gender. There's another group of people who are broadly called detransitioners. They are people who consider themselves trans and then revert the process. Those people generally revert the process because of societal pressures, rather than not being trans.
There are people whose opposition to these changes actually comes down to the fact that they don't believe that people can be gender fluid. What do you say to those people?
I sort of understand where they're coming from, because I can't imagine not having changed my gender. You can't imagine what it's like not to live in the body in which you live in. However, in a civilized society, we accept that people have different experiences to us, and we believe those experiences.
That was the Scottish trans rights campaigner Herbert. Now, according to the Scottish Government, their reforms would have increased the number of annual applications for gender recognition certificates from 30 to around 300.